He said I was slowing him down, that the empire I built was holding him back. I didn't argue. I just walked out, suitcase in hand, leaving half a century of legacy behind. 3 days later, there were 111 missed calls, and the echo of a man realizing that the foundation he destroyed was the one still holding him up. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the last language of power. The crystal glass bowed before I did. Ethan's hand hit the table hard enough to rattle the silverware, and for a second I could hear my heartbeat louder than the city outside. The Miller Towers top-floor restaurant was supposed to be the symbol of everything we'd built, 40 years of labor, sweat, and precision turned into skyline. Yet in that moment, it felt like a stranger's monument. "Dad," he said, voice sharp, words rehearsed. "You're slowing me down. You're in the way." He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the board members seated across the table. Young men in expensive suits who nodded like obedient shadows. Beside him, his wife Miranda sipped her wine and smiled the kind of smile that hides judgment behind politeness. The one that says, "You've had your time. Ours starts now." I didn't answer. I'd learned long ago that silence is stronger than any defense. It unsettles people who think power lives in volume. When I was 28, his age, now I was hauling bricks in the rain. I built this company, Miller Group, from the ground up with nothing but debt blisters and the unshakable conviction that integrity mattered more than growth. We never missed a payroll. We never cheated a client. I thought that was enough to build a legacy. But legacies, I was beginning to understand, are fragile. They don't die when the money's gone. They die when the values do. Ethan leaned forward. "You're too cautious, Dad. Investors are moving fast and you're stuck in the past. We can't win with old school ethics anymore." Old school ethics. He said it like a disease. I looked at him. My son, the boy who used to follow me to construction sites, the one who once cried when a worker cut his hand because, "Dad, he's bleeding for us." That boy was gone, replaced by a man who thought morality was an expense line. I asked, quietly, "What are you trying to tell me, Ethan?" He exhaled, "That it's time for you to step aside. You built this company. Now let me take it forward." Miranda's hand slid over his and she whispered, "It's better this way, John. You deserve rest." Rest. The word cut deeper than I expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was final, like a gravestone with my name already carved. I took a sip of water, watching the ice melt slowly. It reminded me of myself, solid once, now quietly dissolving into what others needed me to be. Finally, I said, "If you believe you can carry it, then carry it. But remember, it's not just a company you're inheriting. It's people and it's trust. Those things don't show up on a balance sheet." He smiled politely, mistaking restraint for surrender. "I know, Dad. Don't worry. I've got this." For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, hesitation, fear, maybe even guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it came. Pride has a way of hiding its own cracks. I stood up. "Then this will be my last dinner here." The room froze. A waiter stopped mid-step, holding a tray of wine glasses. Miranda blinked. Ethan frowned. "Dad, don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I said, my voice steady. "I'm simply making space. You said I was in the way. I won't be." The weight of those words hung heavy, thicker than the air-conditioned silence that followed. As I walked toward the elevator, I could feel the stares on my back, some pitying, some relieved. I pressed the button for the lobby, and as the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Same face, same calm eyes. But something inside had shifted, a quiet fracture between father and son, legacy and ego, principle and ambition. When I stepped outside, the night air hit me like truth. Cold, honest, undeniable. Chicago stretched beneath me, glittering and indifferent. The towers I had built, my towers, pierced the skyline like silent witnesses. I stood there for a long time, watching their lights shimmer against the fog. Somewhere behind one of those windows, Ethan was celebrating. Maybe he thought this was freedom, unchained from the old man and his outdated rules. He didn't understand yet that rules are what keep walls standing. When the taxi arrived, I gave the driver my home address. Halfway there, I changed my mind. "Actually," I said, "take me to the Lakeshore Plaza Hotel." The driver glanced at me through the mirror. "You moving out, sir?" I smiled faintly. "You could say that." He nodded, as if he understood. Maybe he did. Men who've lived long enough recognize the tone of endings. At the hotel, I checked in under a different name, Jay Hartman, the same alias I'd used in my first business trip decades ago. Funny how life circles back when it wants to teach you something. In my room, I sat by the window, staring at the glow of Miller Tower. I thought of Ethan, of Miranda, of all the nights I'd stayed late so he wouldn't have to start where I did. I'd built him a bridge, and somehow he decided to burn it. But I didn't feel anger, just a quiet, steady resolve, the kind that doesn't shout or fight, the kind that waits. And in that waiting, I realized something. When a man says you're in the way, it usually means he's about to trip over the path you cleared for him. The first night in the hotel was too quiet. When you've spent a lifetime surrounded by motion construction sites, telephones, meetings that begin before sunrise, silence doesn't sound peaceful. It sounds like punishment. I sat near the window, the Chicago skyline spread beneath me like a pulse of light and glass. Somewhere out there, Ethan was sitting in my chair, the one I'd spent 40 years earning. And I wondered whether he felt the weight that came with it, or if he even knew it was supposed to be heavy. I told myself not to check the news, not to call Frank, not to look at the Miller Group dashboards I still had access to. I lasted 6 hours. At 2:14 a.m., my phone vibrated once, then again, 3 messages from Frank. Ethan just froze our capital reserves. Investors in Miami are threatening to pull out. I told you this was coming, John. I put the phone down and stared at the reflection in the window. The city lights cut through the glass and landed across my face, dividing me into two men, the one who built and the one who'd been told to leave. When you spend decades leading, it's difficult to watch others fall into holes you already filled. But that's the curse of age. You can't stop them from repeating your mistakes. You can only step us and let lesson bruise them into wisdom. By morning, my phone had 37 missed calls. By noon, it had 72. By the end of the second day, 111. Most of them were from Ethan. A few from board members who used to swear loyalty with the same breath they now used for panic. None of them understood. The silence wasn't neglect. It was patience. Frank called again that evening. I finally answered. John. He said, his voice tight. He's in deep trouble. He signed a contract with an unverified offshore investor. The deal's collapsing. The Miami project wasn't ready. I finished. I told him 3 months ago not to push it. You did. He ignored it. Then let him learn. Frank hesitated. He's your son. He's all's. There was silence on the line. Frank had been with me long enough to know what silence meant. He sighed. Do you ever plan to go back when he's ready to listen? When the call ended, I walked down to the street and sat on a bench near the lake. The wind came off the water sharp and alive. Across the skyline, I could still see the faint glow of the Miller Tower logo. It used to make me proud. Now it just made me think about the cost of inheritance. A father builds to protect. A son inherits to prove. And between those two verbs, something sacred always breaks. The next day, a knock came at my hotel door. When I opened it, a courier stood there with a small black envelope, the kind we used for board emergencies. Inside was a single page, a printout of the company's morning balance sheet, read everywhere. Half the assets frozen, the Miami project officially abandoned, and investor trust plummeting by the hour. The numbers didn't surprise me. What did was the handwritten note at the bottom of the page. Dad, I don't know how to fix this. I need you. E. For a long time, I just stood there reading the handwriting over and over. It wasn't the confession of a CEO. It was the cry of a boy who finally realized how much noise pride makes before it collapses. That night I went for a walk by the pier. The lake was black, swallowing the city's reflection whole. I thought about the first time I took Ethan to a job site. He was 8. His hands were too small to hold the hammer, but he tried anyway. I told him something that day I thought he'd forgotten. Building isn't about speed, it's about endurance. The walls that stand the longest are the ones built in silence. I hadn't realized I'd just described fatherhood. When I returned to the hotel lobby, The night manager handed me another note. "Someone dropped this off for you, Mr. Hartman." It was Frank again. "Emergency board meeting. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Miller Tower. Attendance requested John Miller." Requested. I begged. They still did not understand. You can't request gravity to return. It just does when things start to fall. I didn't sleep that night. I ironed a shirt I hadn't worn in years, the pale gray Oxford one Emma used to call my battle uniform. As dawn broke, the city began to hum again. Cars, horns, ambition, the eternal chorus of men chasing importance. I stood by the window and whispered to no one. "All right, Ethan. Let's see what kind of empire you've built." The sun rose behind the towers, and for the first time in 3 days, I saw my name shining again across the skyline. Miller Group. But this time it didn't look like pride. It looked like a warning. When I walked into the lobby of Miller Tower that morning, even the marble looked nervous. The receptionist straightened her blazer like a soldier spotting a returning general. She whispered my name before I reached the elevator. I didn't correct her. The elevator climbed through 40 floors of my own history, each ding a reminder of what I'd once believed permanence meant. When the doors slid open, the air was different. Colder. Ambition always smells sterile when panic begins to rot underneath it. Frank Alvarez waited by the glass doors of the boardroom, holding a folder tight against his chest. "John," he murmured, "they're inside. It's bad. Bad is the first step toward honest," I said. Inside, 12 faces turned toward me. Some I had hired, some had hired me in the end. Ethan stood at the head of the long walnut table, the same table we'd chosen together from a craftsman in Vermont. Now papers littered its surface, like debris after an explosion. He looked different. Not older, just smaller. Authority stripped of certainty shrinks a man faster than age. "Dad," he began, but the word caught. He cleared his throat. "John." Good. We were back to titles. Frank set the folder down in front of me, but I didn't open it. I didn't need numbers to smell ruin. "What happened?" I asked. Ethan gestured toward the projector. Charts flashed across the wall, red lines diving like dying birds. "The Miami deal collapsed," he said. "Our partner pulled funding. We're short 40 million. Suppliers are calling in credit. Investors don't call." I interrupted. "They disappear." A board member coughed. Another shifted his chair. Fear was thick enough to chew. Miranda wasn't there. Maybe she knew better? Maybe pride has its own schedule for retreat. Ethan forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "We just need a bridge loan, Dad. Short-term liquidity. I've already contacted Stop." The room fell silent. The kind of silence that presses on the ribs. "Before you ask anyone for money," I said, "you need to decide whether you still own a company or just a logo." He blinked. "I don't understand." "You will." I walked around the table, slowly touching the backs of the chairs, the grain of the wood, the glass wall that faced the skyline. I built this room, I said, not for meetings, for truth. Every contract we signed in here meant something. Every handshake was a promise. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. When you told me I was in the way, you weren't wrong. I was standing between you and the mirror. You wanted to see yourself as a king, not a builder. But a king without foundations is just a man standing on sand. A few board members looked down. They remembered the first contracts, the handshakes in dusty sites, the paychecks signed, late, but always signed. Ethan swallowed. I thought you wanted me to lead. I did, I said. But leadership isn't the same as control. Leadership is stewardship. You take care of what was built before you, so there's something left for after you. He looked around the table, searching for an ally. There were none. They were all listening to me now, not because I spoke louder, but because I spoke cleaner. Frank opened the audit report and spread its pages out. The truth lay there in ink, inflated valuations, backdated approvals, offshore consulting fees. Nothing illegal yet, but dishonest enough to smell like smoke before fire. Ethan stared at it. His jaw tightened. Miranda advised me to take those deals. She said, she's not here, I cut in, because responsibility never shows up twice. For a moment, no one moved. Then I walked to the head of the table and stood beside him. I won't take your chair, I said. You wanted it. You keep it. But you'll earn it. How? By listening. I took a marker and wrote one word on the whiteboard behind him, integrity. Then I circled it once slowly. This is your bridge loan, I said. Without this, no amount of capital will save you. He stared at the word as if it were a foreign language. Maybe it was. I turned to the board. Effective immediately, I'm reinstating Frank as Chief Financial Officer and suspending all external projects until internal audit is complete. We don't need new money. We need new discipline. Someone started to object, then stop when I looked at him. Not angry, just steady. There's a kind of authority that never retires. When the meeting ended, Ethan stood alone by the window. The city below looked the same, but his reflection did not. He said, I don't know how to fix this. I walked to the door. You don't fix it, I said. You rebuild it. And this time, you start with yourself. He nodded, eyes wet but steady. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like my son. That night, I didn't drive home. Home had stopped being a place long before Ethan told me to leave. It had become a memory made of walls and echoes. The house was full of photographs, pretending time hadn't moved Emma's smile. In a frame, Ethan's graduation picture, the company logo engraved on a trophy that meant nothing now. So I walked instead along the Chicago River, where the air tasted like metal and distance. The streets were half empty, wind scraping through them like unfinished sentences. The reflections on the water looked like inverted skyscrapers, proud on the surface, trembling underneath. People think collapse is loud. It isn't. Collapse sounds like the whisper of papers nobody reads anymore. It's the way a boardroom chair stays unoccupied after a fall. It's the silence of men too proud to call for help, and the hum of an empire trying to pretend it's still alive. And sometimes collapse is your own heartbeat reminding you that pride doesn't echo, it fades. I sat on a bench by the bridge, hands folded, watching the current move faster than my thoughts. Somewhere above me, the glass towers glowed like nothing had changed. But I knew better. Legacy isn't measured in height. It's measured in how quietly it survives after the applause ends. The wind carried pieces of conversation from passing strangers after plans, promises. The living soundtrack of people who hadn't yet learned that everything built on ambition alone eventually runs out of breath. I thought about the look in Ethan's eyes earlier that day. He'd walked into that meeting with a briefcase full of confidence and walked out carrying silence, not defeat realization, the kind that burns slowly before it heals. My phone buzzed. A message. I didn't know what integrity costs until today. I'm sorry, Dad. Ethan never said sorry. He believed apologies were currency for the weak. Seeing those words from him felt heavier than any financial report. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Apologies, I've learned, are like wet cement. Touch them too soon, and they lose their shape. You let them harden first, or they'll crumble back into habit. Instead, I opened the photo folder stored in the cloud, the one labeled Ground Zero. Hundreds of pictures filled the screen, men in yellow helmets, hands calloused and proud faces streaked with dust. The first workers of Miller Group. Back then, we didn't have gas offices or board meetings. We had dirt, hunger, and belief. Every brick we laid was a promise to ourselves that we'd be better tomorrow. I remembered one of them, Daniel, a welder. He used to say, "Mr. Miller, buildings don't fall because of storms. They fall because someone used cheap steel." He was right. It wasn't storms that nearly destroyed Miller Group. It was shortcuts disguised as strategy. I closed my phone and leaned back against the bench. The river hissed quietly, restless. Somewhere downtown, I could see the faint blue glow of Miller Tower's logo against the night sky. MILLERGROUP, 6 letters that had once meant safety, trust, family. Now, they looked like a warning sign for what happens when sons inherit monuments, but not the values that built them. I whispered into the wind, half prayer, half confession. We built towers for the world to see us. But maybe what mattered most were the foundations no one ever will. Dawn came slowly. The horizon cracked open with light spilling gold across the city. For a moment, everything glowed: the streets, the water, even the stains on my hands that no soap had ever managed to erase. And in that light, I made a decision. I wasn't done building yet. Not buildings, not companies, not sons. At 8 sharp, I walked back into Miller Tower. The security guard straightened up when he saw me. "Morning, Mr. Miller?" "Morning, Ray," I said. The way he said my name, still with respect, reminded me some legacies live in people, not signatures. Upstairs, Ethan was already in the boardroom. His jacket was gone. Sleeves rolled, tie loosened, eyes red from a night without sleep. The arrogance was missing. In its place, exhaustion. And something better. Humility. "Where do we start?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I opened the drawer under the old conference table and pulled out a large brown tube. Inside was the first blueprint ever drawn for Miller Group, yellowed at the edges, coffee-stained fragile. I rolled it out on the table. "This," I said, "this is where it began. The first apartment block we ever built. 24 units. No marble, no elevators, no investors, just faith, and 40 men who believed a handshake was stronger than a contract." He studied the paper like scripture. "You kept it all these years. I keep everything that reminds me who we are," I said, "and who we forgot to be." We worked side by side all day. No assistants, no interruptions. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. I showed him where the real blueprints were kept, the old ones with handwritten notes about materials and deadlines. He showed me the financial forecasts, the chaos he'd been hiding behind presentation slides. At one point, he looked up and said quietly, "I thought leadership was about being followed. But it's about being trusted, isn't it?" I nodded. "It's about being responsible for what follows you when you're gone." By evening, the tension had thinned. The air felt breathable again. The phone started ringing, suppliers asking if rumors were true that the founder was back. Ethan answered each call calmly, assuring them we were stabilizing. His tone carried the steadiness of a man learning from the edge of loss. When the last call ended, he leaned back in his chair, eyes glossy. "Thank you for coming back," he said. I smiled faintly. "I didn't come back to rescue you. I came back to remind you how to build." As the sun sank behind the skyline, the city turned to gold again, the same hue that had always followed my life's work. I looked at Ethan and said softly, "Every empire collapses eventually, son. But the builders always know how to start again." The next morning, the office didn't feel like a company headquarters. It felt like a construction site again. People spoke in shorter sentences. Phones rang without panic. And for the first time in years, the sound of silence meant focus, not fear. Ethan was in before me. He had a notebook, open pen in hand, scribbling lines that looked more like confessions than plans. When he looked up, there was no corporate smile, no shield, just a son learning how to breathe again. "Morning, Dad," he said quietly. "Morning, son." 2 words we hadn't exchanged in months, and suddenly they carried more weight than every deal he'd ever signed. We started the day by walking through the building, not to inspect, but to listen. The elevators hummed. The walls echoed faintly with footsteps. Down on the 10th floor, I saw the maintenance staff scrubbing the floors, their uniforms faded, their bag bent. One of them, Luis, a man I hired 20 years ago, froze when he saw me. Then he smiled wide and genuine. "Senor Miller," he said, wiping his hands, "didn't think I'd see you again." "You almost didn't," I replied. "How are things?" He shrugged. "We've been surviving." That word surviving hit me harder than any boardroom insult. I looked at Ethan. He understood. He didn't speak, but he took out his phone and typed something down. Later, I saw it on his new action board. Reinstate staff bonuses. Increase maintenance budget. Ask their stories. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Back upstairs, we opened the financials line by line, page by page. Numbers don't lie, but they do hide. I taught Ethan to see between them. We traced unnecessary expenses, hollow partnerships, brand image waste. Miranda's influence, I muttered. Image over substance. Ethan didn't defend her this time. He just nodded and crossed the items out. "Dad," he said after a long pause, "do you think she ever loved me for who I am?" I looked at him for a while. "The question isn't whether she did," I said. "It's whether you did. You built yourself around how she saw you. That's not love. That's architecture without steel." He smiled faintly, the kind that comes after being hit by truth and realizing it won't kill you. By noon, the office smelled like coffee and exhaustion. Frank dropped by with files from the audit. "The banks are calming down," he said. "Investors just want clarity." "They'll get it," I replied, "but not the old kind." We gathered the core team, finance, operations, HR, in the small conference room. Not the big glass one. No suits, no titles, just people. I spoke first. "We're not here to save an empire," I said. "We're here to rebuild a foundation. The name Miller doesn't guarantee trust anymore. We earn it again starting today." The room was quiet. Then Luis from maintenance, whom I had invited, deliberately raised his hand. "Mr. Miller," he said, "my father worked on your first building. He used to tell me you'd shake every worker's hand at the end of the week. He said that's what made the company different." I nodded. "Your father taught me something too," I said. "He once told me good men don't just build roofs. They make sure no one under them gets wet." That line hung in the air, still as stone. Ethan wrote it down word for word. We spent the next few hours really listening to the people who'd been invisible during the company's shiny years. A secretary who hadn't taken a vacation in 5 years. A site manager who mortgaged his house to cover payroll during the crisis. Every story was a quiet bruise under the skin of a structure that still stood barely. Ethan listened, with his head bowed, eyes wet but steady. And for the first time, I saw him not as the boy who inherited my empire, but as the man who might one day deserve it. By late afternoon, sunlight streamed through the high windows, turning the dust in the air into gold. I looked around and saw something I hadn't seen in years' belief, not in profit, in purpose. Ethan turned to me and said, "It's strange. I spent years trying to impress people who never built anything. And now, I just want to earn back the respect of the ones who actually did." "That's how you know you're starting over," I said. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think we can fix all this?" "No," I said, "but we can make it honest again." We worked until evening, rewriting protocols, simplifying projects, drafting letters to investors that didn't spin the truth but faced it head on. At one point, Ethan looked up from the keyboard and said, "I used to think silence was weakness. Now I realize it's where the truth waits." I smiled. "That's stoicism, son. It's not about staying silent. It's about saying only what matters." The building emptied slowly. Lights dimmed. Outside, the city glittered like broken glass, trying to look whole. Ethan packed his briefcase and looked at me. "Coming home tonight?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I've got a few more things to finish here." He nodded, hesitant. "I'll see you tomorrow." He started toward the elevator, then turned back. "Dad," he said quietly, "thanks for staying." When he was gone, I stood alone in that half-lit office. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. I walked to the window. The reflection staring back at me was older-lined, weathered. But for the first time in years, I recognized him. I whispered to my own reflection. We spend half our lives building walls to protect ourselves, and the other half learning which ones to tear down. Behind me, the blueprint still lay open on the table. I rolled it carefully and slid it into its tube. Not as a relic, as a reminder. Tomorrow would be harder. Investors, the press, maybe Miranda. But tonight, in the quiet, I felt something rare. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because finally everything was real again. By Friday, the air had changed again. The panic was gone, replaced by something subtler, anticipation. That morning, I felt it before I reached the 32nd floor, the hush of a place, holding its breath. Ethan was standing at the window when I walked in. His tie was tight, his hands in his pockets. That usually meant he was preparing for a storm. "She's here," he said without turning. "Who?" He looked over his shoulder. "Miranda." The name landed like glass breaking somewhere out of sight. When the door opened, she stepped in wearing a white coat and a practiced smile. The kind you learn in boardrooms, not in love. "John," she said, "you look well." "You?" I nodded. "You look excessive." She laughed once, sharp, brittle, still poetic. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Miranda came to discuss a proposal," he said. "She's representing Apex Capital now." Of course she was. Apex, the same investors who'd nearly gutted our Miami deal. She placed a tablet on the table and turned it toward us. Charts, projections, promises, all dressed in the language of salvation. "I know things have been difficult," she said, "but Apex is willing to refinance the debt. Fresh capital, full rebrand, new leadership narrative. It's the future, Ethan." I watched her talk. Her tone was confident, but her eyes kept flicking toward me, searching for weakness or forgiveness. Maybe both. When she finished, the room was quiet. Ethan looked at me. What do you think? I think I said slowly that the future she's offering smells a lot like the mistake we just buried. Miranda folded her arms. You always mistake progress for betrayal. No, I said. I just recognized the price tag. Her face hardened. You're still holding a grudge because Ethan listened to me instead of you. I don't hold grudges, I replied. I hold lessons. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan said softly, Miranda, can you give us a minute? She hesitated, then gathered her tablet and left the scent of expensive perfume lingering like a signature you can't erase. When the door closed, Ethan exhaled. She's not wrong about the rebrand. Apex could stabilize us fast. Stability built on dependency isn't stability, I said. It's sedation. He rubbed his forehead. You make everything sound like scripture. Only because you forget who writes it. He looked out the window again. She says they'll back us if I agree to merge leadership. Make her COO. I almost laughed. There it is. The fine print always hides in the smile. He'd have turned. Maybe I can handle her differently. Now, maybe, I said. But tell me something, Ethan, why do you want her back? For the company or for yourself? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I sat down opposite him. Sun power without peace is just noise. You can rebuild this empire 100 times, but if you let her define your worth again, you'll lose it by morning. He looked at me, eyes red. What if I can't separate the two anymore? I leaned forward. Then that's your real bankruptcy. The words hung between us, not cruel, just true. That evening I left him alone in the office. Some lessons require solitude to germinate. Downstairs, the security guard nodded as I passed. Late night again, Mr. Miller. Monsieur. Always, I said. Outside Chicago, shimmered under light rain, the kind that makes every street reflect itself twice. I stopped at the corner cafe where Emma and I used to drink coffee before sunrise. The barista didn't recognize me, which felt strangely comforting. As I stirred my cup, I saw my reflection in the window, older, quieter, steadier. Behind that reflection, I imagined Ethan upstairs standing between love and legacy, trying to choose. The hardest part of fatherhood isn't letting your children fall. It's watching them fall toward the same fire you once escaped and realizing you can't drag them out. You can only wait with open hands. When I returned to the apartment, the phone buzzed again. Ethan, I told her no. I stared at the message for a long time. 3 words heavy as steel. Then another came through. You were right. Progress shouldn't cost integrity. I smiled, small and tired. Outside, the rain eased. I walked to the balcony, the city breathing beneath me. Somewhere below, I could still see Miller Tower, glowing faint gold against the wet sky. For the first time, it didn't look like an empire or a monument. It looked like a promise, slowly learning how to keep itself. I whispered to the night, good. Now let's see if it stands. The wind carried the words away, back toward the tower, toward Ethan. And for the first time since I'd left, I felt the quiet pulse of something sacred, rebuilding trust. It started the next morning, not with thunder, but with headlines. By 7 a.m., every business blog and finance channel carried the same story. Miller Group faces allegations of mismanagement sources. Cite internal power struggle. The source was unnamed, but the language was unmistakable. Miranda. She hadn't walked away. She'd circled back with teeth. When I arrived at the office, the phones were already ringing like alarms. Investors, partners, journalists, all wanting confirmation, all pretending they cared about truth when they were just hungry for blood. Ethan stood at his desk surrounded by chaos employees whispering messages, flashing voices rising through the floor vents. He looked up, and I saw it in his eyes, that familiar panic. Not because of the numbers this time, but because betrayal feels personal, even when it's predictable. She went public, he said. I saw. She's accusing us of fraud, Dad. Says we falsified records to hide the Miami losses. She's not accusing us, I said. She's accusing you. Because she can't hurt what she already lost, only who she lost it to. He slumped into his chair, hands gripping his hair. What do we do? First, I said we don't respond in anger. She's destroying everything we rebuilt. Then let her. If what we rebuilt can be destroyed by words, it wasn't rebuilt right. He looked at me like I was speaking another language. Maybe I was. Stoicism doesn't translate well under pressure. The day became a blur of statements and damage control. Lawyers called. PR drafted responses I refused to approve. Every denial sounds guilty, I told them. We don't doubt truth. We demonstrate it. By evening, Miller Group's name was trending not for its legacy, but for its alleged fall. Online strangers dissected our lives with surgical cruelty. Someone even uploaded a photo of me and Ethan leaving the office, captioned, "Father and son hiding behind old money and old lies." I almost laughed. If only they knew how much truth costs compared to lies. Frank came into my office holding a folder. She leaked our internal audit drafts, he said. The early, unverified versions. Makes it look like we were covering up millions. I took the folder and flipped through it. Numbers blurred together like a fever. Does she still have access? No. She must have saved copies before she left. Ethan paced behind me. This is going to bury us. Not if we bury our fear first, I said. He stomped on bait. You always talk like the world doesn't scare you. It does, I said quietly. I just learned not to obey it. That night, the board demanded an emergency conference. Half the faces were more interested in reputation than redemption. They wanted distance disclaimers, new leadership. One even said maybe it's time the Miller name stepped aside. I didn't argue. I just looked around the table at men who once cheered our rise, now rehearsing how to survive our fall. I'd seen that look before. It's the same one builders have. When the scaffolding starts to shake, they step back, hoping the structure collapses before blame lands on them. After the call, Ethan stayed in the darkened boardroom, staring out at the skyline. I thought saying no to her would fix everything, he whispered. No, I said. It just revealed who she really was and who you're about to become. He turned to me. How do I keep the company alive when everyone wants to watch it die? By standing still while they shout. I said, noise burns itself out. Truth doesn't need applause, just endurance. He nodded slowly. You make it sound simple. It is, I said. Simple isn't the same as easy. We worked through the night, preparing for the audit committee's review. Every document, every contract, nothing hidden. Nothing spun. At 3 a.m., Ethan finally fell asleep on the couch, his head tilted back, exhaustion softening the lines that pride once carved into his face. I watched him in the dim light and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not for what he'd built, but for what he hadn't run from. As the first light of dawn broke, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. You should have taken the deal, John. I warned you. Now you'll lose him too. I stared at the screen until the words faded under my reflection. Miranda had always mistaken destruction for closure, but she'd never understood that silence, when chosen, is more powerful than any revenge. I typed nothing back. I simply placed the phone face down on the desk and whispered, You can't threaten a man who's already lost everything once and learned how to live without it. Outside the city began to wake. The storm was far from over, but something inside me had shifted. The noise was rising, but my mind was still. And in that stillness, I knew the next day would decide everything. The morning of the audit felt like the morning of a funeral. No one said it, but every face carried the same quiet dread. The look of people waiting to see what would be buried and who would go down with it. Ethan hadn't slept. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion. His shirt wrinkled, his tie crooked. He looked like a man who had wrestled his own conscience all night and lost, then realized losing was the only way to win. Frank and I sat across from him in the conference room, papers stacked like defenses. The committee would arrive in 20 minutes. He ran his hand through his hair and said, If this goes wrong, they'll strip my license, Dad. I'll never run a company again. I nodded. Then make sure it goes right by not trying to save yourself. He frowned. What does that even mean? It means you tell the truth, even the part that makes you look guilty. Because truth doesn't protect your reputation. It repairs your soul. He exhaled. You really believe that I do? I said, 'Cause I've already lost both before. The soul is the only one that can be rebuilt. The board members arrived. The auditors followed. The room filled with tension, disguised as professionalism. Every laptop click sounded like a verdict being loaded. They began with the accusations falsified, statements concealed, debts, insider transfers. Each claim carried the scent of Miranda's perfume, polished, persuasive, and poisonous. Ethan stood to speak. His voice trembled once, then steadied. Every number in those drafts was real at the time, he said. What wasn't real was me. I let ambition blind me. I let people I trusted shape decisions I didn't understand. But I won't let silence become another lie. He turned to me. My father warned me, and I called it fear. But it was wisdom, the kind you only recognize when it's too late. The room went still. One auditor asked, "Are you saying the losses were deliberate?" "No," Ethan said. "They were the cost of arrogance." And then before anyone could cut him off, he slid a folder across the table. "The full records," he said, "unfiltered. Every transaction, every misstep. If we're guilty, let it show. But I'm done pretending success is the same thing as survival." Silence. The kind of silence that changes temperature. Frank looked at me, a flicker of fear, respect, and disbelief in his eyes. I didn't move. This was Ethan's moment. His fall or his beginning. After a long minute, the lead auditor cleared her throat. "We'll review everything, but I'll say this. I've never seen a CEO hand over his own evidence." Ethan nodded. "Then you've never seen one raised by him," he said, glancing toward me. For the first time that day, I let myself smile. It wasn't pride. It was peace. When the meeting adjourned, everyone left in slow silence. Frank lingered near the door. "That was madness," he whispered. "Beautiful, suicidal madness." I chuckled. "The only kind that rebuilds anything worth keeping." He shook his head and left us alone. Ethan leaned against the wall, shoulders trembling. "I think I just destroyed us." "No," I said. "You just detonated the lie. What's left standing now is real." We walked out together. Cameras flashed in the lobby. Reporters shouted questions. "Is the company bankrupt? Are you resigning? Is Miranda telling the truth?" Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but I put a hand on his arm. "Let them talk," I said. "Every storm ends the same way. Noise fades, structure remains." Outside, the air was sharp and cold. The street smelled of rain and gasoline, the scent of something both ending and beginning. We stood there, father and son, watching the reflection of Miller Tower in a puddle by the curb. Upside down, fractured, but still recognizable. "Do you think we'll make it through this?" he asked. I looked at the tower, then at him. "No one ever really makes it through," I said. "We just learn which parts of ourselves deserve to." He nodded slowly, tears forming but never falling. Then across the street, a small group of workers, construction men, from one of our old sites waved at us. They didn't shout. They didn't ask for answers. They just lifted their hands, nodding once, quiet solidarity, the kind that can't be bought. Ethan lifted his hand back, eyes wet. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, forgiveness, perhaps even faith. And just like that, I knew the company might survive after all, not because of the board, not because of investors, but because of that simple gesture. The detonation had done its work. The noise had burned away. And from the silence, something unbreakable began to hum again, integrity. As we turned to leave, Ethan whispered, "Dad, what do we do now?" I looked at him and said softly, "Now we rebuild. Not for profit, not for pride, but so the next time someone carries our name, they don't have to rebuild it again." He nodded, and together we walked into the cold light of morning. Two builders carrying nothing but truth and the quiet strength to start again. The city woke the next day with a different kind of silence. Not the heavy quiet of fear, the clean one that comes after something has finally broken and the dust starts to settle. I didn't go to the office right away. I went to the pier. The water was calm, gray, endless, like a mirror that had finally stopped shaking. I stood there for a long time, coat pulled tight, listening to the wind off the lake. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel defeated. I just felt empty in a way that wasn't sad, like a wound that had already bled itself dry. Around 8 a.m., my phone rang. "Frank, they've finished the audit," he said, voice hoarse from exhaustion. "And they cleared Ethan. No fraud, just bad decisions." "Good," I said. "There's more," Frank added. Apex Capital's internal documents leaked overnight. Turns out Miranda fabricated half her claims. "She's finished." I didn't respond right away. The lake rippled as if reacting for me. "John," he said, quieter now, "you were right to stay silent." "No," I said. "I just learned that shouting only makes echoes. Silence lets the truth find its own voice." He exhaled through the line. "What do we do now?" "Same thing we've always done," I said. "We build slow, honest, from the inside out." I hung up and slipped the phone into my pocket. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of church bells from somewhere deep in the city, old, distant, steady. By noon, the world had already moved on. The headlines shifted to newer scandals. Miranda's name disappeared like a shadow under new light. That's how the modern world buries guilt, not with shame, but with distraction. At the office, people looked at me differently. Not like a savior, not like a ghost, but like a man who had stayed when everyone else ran. Ethan met me in the corridor. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and hugged me. It was awkward, stiff, unexpected, but it was real. And when he pulled away, he said, "They want me to hold a press conference." "Then hold it," I said. "What should I say?" "The truth," I replied. "All of it, especially the part that makes them uncomfortable." That afternoon we stood together in front of the microphones. Flashbulbs. Voices. Ethan adjusted the mic. His hands didn't shake this time. He said there was a reason my father built this company with his name. He wanted to remind everyone, including me, that you can't hide behind what you've built. You have to stand in front of it. We made mistakes. I made mistakes. But today we start over, not as a business, but as builders. Then he stepped aside, and for a second the cameras turned toward me. I didn't plan to speak, but words have their own gravity when silence lasts too long. I used to think legacy was about what you leave behind, I said. But it's really about who still believes in you after you've failed. Then I walked away. The next morning, the company's stock rose slightly, not much, but enough to remind us that faith moves slower than fear, but it lasts longer. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single line written in blue ink. I finally understand what you meant about cheap steel. Emma. No apology, no explanation, just that line. And strangely, it was enough. That evening, I drove back to the same hotel I had stayed in the night I left home. Room 314. The same view of the skyline. But it looked different now, smaller, gentler, almost human. I poured a cup of coffee, opened my old notebook, and wrote 3 sentences at the top of a new page. Collapse is not failure. Failure is pretending collapse never happened. Rebuilding is confession made visible. The pen stopped trembling after that. Later that night, Ethan called. The workers want to host a dinner for everyone who stayed. Then go, I said. They want you there too. I will. There was a pause. Then he said, Dad, thank you for letting me fail. I smiled. I didn't let you. I just didn't stop you. Same thing he said. Not quite, I replied. One is love. The other is wisdom. You needed both. When the call ended, I turned off the lights and looked out across the sleeping city. The glow of Miller Tower shimmered faintly through the mist. Not proud, not broken, just alive. And for the first time in a long time, I realized the company was never the story. It was always the metaphor. We build our lives the same way we build towers, with faith, stubbornness, and the illusion that height equals meaning. But the truth hides in the foundations. What we build doesn't matter half as much as what we build it on. I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, folded the letter from Miranda, and slid it into my notebook beside the new page. Some stories don't end with forgiveness or revenge. They end with understanding, quiet, incomplete, but enough to move forward. The night stretched long and silver across the skyline. I whispered to the window. Maybe that's what legacy really is, the silence that keeps teaching after you're gone. And somewhere far below, the lights of Miller Tower flickered once, like an old heartbeat, learning its rhythm again. I went back to the site where it had all started, the first Miller Group project, a modest block of brick and concrete on the south side. The sign was faded, the paint peeling, but the building was still standing. 24 units. Every balcony held a different story. Children, plants, laundry, laughter. It was never glamorous. It was honest. I parked the truck and just stood there, breathing in the dust that smelled the same as it did 40 years ago. Metal, rain, and hope. People walked past me without recognizing the name on the old cornerstone, Miller and Son Construction, 1990. Back then in the end, sun was just a dream. Now it was real. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to earn it. I sat on the curb and let memory replay like an old film reel. The day Ethan was born. The day I signed the first contract. The night Emma told me, "You can't build forever, John. Someday you have to learn to just live in what you built." I hadn't listened. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. Some men build because they're chasing pride. Some build because they're running from regret. Me, I built because silence scared me. Now silence is all I want. The phone buzzed again, a photo from Ethan. The team at the office, smiling sleeves rolled, rebuilding the Miami proposal the right way this time. The caption read, "Not an empire anymore, just a company that remembers who it is." I smiled. That was enough. I drove back toward the city. The skyline rose ahead, sharp, endless, familiar. For years, I'd thought it was the measure of my worth. Now it looked different, softer, like a line someone drew with the confidence to stop pressing so hard. At a red light, I saw a man on the sidewalk carrying a wooden beam on his shoulder. His shirt was torn, hands raw, but he was humming, building something small, maybe a fence, maybe a home. I rolled down the window and called out, "You need a hand." He grinned. "Nah, old man, I've got it." And for some reason that made me laugh. When the light turned green, I kept driving, whispering, "Good. Keep it steady." That night, I sat on the balcony again, the same view of the tower, the same gold-gray glow bleeding through the mist. I poured a glass of whiskey I didn't finish and opened my notebook. The page from last week stared back at me. Collapse is not failure. Failure is pretending. Collapse never happened. I added one more line beneath it. And forgiveness is the structure we build when we stop needing walls. The wind flipped the page as if agreeing. I thought of Miranda. I didn't hate her. She taught me something only pain can teach, that ambition, without conscience, always ends up lonely. And I thought of Ethan sleeping somewhere downtown, unaware that the empire he feared losing had already become something greater. A lesson. The city hummed like a living organism. Somewhere a siren wailed. Somewhere a baby cried. Somewhere two strangers made promises they'd try to keep. Life, messy, persistent, unstoppable. I raised the glass slightly toward the skyline. "To the builders," I whispered. "The ones who keep showing up after the noise stops." The whiskey burned going down, but it felt clean, like the last trace of something leaving my body. Emma once said there's a difference between rebuilding and returning. Returning means chasing what was. Rebuilding means accepting what's left. Tonight I finally understood her. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness have the room. The city outside pulsed in soft gold, the stoic gold, as if forgiving the gray that made it shine. Before I fell asleep, I said one last thing, not to anyone, but to the silence itself. We build, we lose, we learn. And if we're lucky, we build again, quieter this time. The lights of Miller Tower flickered once or more in the distance, steady now, as if nodding back. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of falling. I dreamed of standing, hands covered in dust, heart unburdened, ready to build again.